I want you to picture something for me. Imagine pulling into the driveway of the place you've called home for nearly a year. Your 7-year-old son is in the back seat, kicking his feet against the seat and humming a song from his favorite cartoon. You've got grocery bags in the trunk, milk, bread, his favorite cereal that was on sale. It's a normal Saturday afternoon, the kind of afternoon that shouldn't change your life. But then you see it. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of what my eyes were seeing. There were things on the lawn, clothes, furniture, boxes. It looked like someone was moving out, except nobody had told me about any move. I slowed the car to a crawl, and that's when I recognized my own belongings scattered across the grass like debris after a tornado. My wedding dress was draped over a garbage can at the end of the driveway. The dress I wore when I married Neil 8 years ago. The dress I'd kept preserved in a box in the closet. The dress I'd imagined showing my future daughter-in-law someday. It was hanging there like a rag, the hem dragging in the dirt. Corbin's bicycle was lying in the street, not the driveway, the street, like someone had thrown it there hoping a car would run it over. I put the car in park and just sat there, unable to move. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Mommy, why is my bike outside?" Corbin's voice broke through my paralysis. I looked in the rearview mirror at my son, at his confused little face pressed against the window, trying to understand what he was seeing. I didn't have an answer for him. I didn't have an answer for myself. I got out of the car on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The scene was worse up close, so much worse. Photo albums lay open in the grass, pages fluttering in the breeze. Our family pictures, Neil and me on our honeymoon, Corbin as a newborn, his first birthday, first day of kindergarten, all of it exposed to the elements like it meant nothing. My jewelry box had been dumped out near the front steps. I could see my grandmother's earrings glinting in the sunlight, tangled up with cheap costume pieces. Clothes were everywhere, my work scrubs from the veterinary clinic, Corbin's little shirts and pants, winter coats, summer dresses, everything we owned, thrown outside like garbage, waiting for pickup. And then I saw the sign. It was wooden, hand-painted, hammered into the ground right in the center of the lawn where anyone driving by could see it. The letters were bright red, neat and deliberate. Someone had taken their time making this sign. Someone had planned this. Freeloaders not welcome. I read those words 3 times before they sank in. Freeloaders. That's what they were calling us. That's what they were telling the whole neighborhood we were. My mother-in-law, Doreen, did this. I knew it before I even saw her face. I knew it in my bones. The front door opened, and there she was. Doreen Burney, 63 years old, standing in the doorway of the house where I'd been living for 11 months. She was wearing gardening gloves and a pleasant expression, like she'd just finished planting petunias instead of destroying my life. "Oh, Tessa," she said. "I was hoping you'd find somewhere else to go before we had to have this conversation." I couldn't speak. The words were stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat, blocked by shock and rage and something that felt like grief all over again. Corbin ran past me before I could stop him. He grabbed his stuffed dog from the wet grass, a ratty little thing he'd slept with since he was 2 years old. He held it against his chest and started to cry, and the sound of my son sobbing finally unlocked my voice. "What have you done?" I asked. "Doreen, what is this?" She smiled. It was a cold smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind I'd seen glimpses of over the years but had always made excuses for. "I've done what I should have done months ago," she said. "You've taken advantage of our generosity long enough." I want to pause here because I need you to understand something. I had paid this woman $1,200 every single month to live in that house. Cash, because she insisted on it. I had worked double shifts at the animal clinic to make sure I never missed a payment. I had cooked meals, cleaned common spaces, followed every ridiculous rule she set. I had bent over backward to be a good guest in her home, and she was calling me a freeloader. But here's the part of the story you're not expecting. Here's the part that changed everything. 5 days after Doreen threw my belongings on the lawn and called me a parasite in front of the whole neighborhood, the police came back to that house. But they weren't there for me. They weren't there to drag me away or charge me with trespassing or any of the things Doreen had threatened. They were there for her. Because that house, The house Doreen had been lording over me for nearly a year, the house she claimed was hers, the house she'd collected rent on and made rules about and ultimately threw me out of, that house was never hers at all. It was mine. It had been mine since the day my husband Neil died, and Doreen had known it the entire time. My name is Tessa Burney. I'm 33 years old, and 11 months ago, I lost my husband in a car accident that shattered my entire world. In my grief, I trusted the wrong people. I let my in-laws convince me I was helpless. I handed over control of my life because I was too broken to fight for myself. This is the story of how I found out the truth. The story of how I discovered that the people who called me a freeloader were the real freeloaders all along. And the story of how I took back everything they tried to steal from me, including my dignity. It starts with that sign on the lawn, but it ends somewhere very different. To understand how I ended up standing on that lawn watching my life scattered across the grass, I need to take you back 11 months, back to the worst day of my life, which until recently I thought was the only worst day I'd ever have. My husband Neil left for work on a cold February morning. There was snow in the forecast, but nothing unusual for Ohio in winter. He kissed me goodbye in the kitchen while I was packing Corbin's lunch for school. He ruffled our son's hair and promised to bring home pizza for dinner. "Pepperoni and extra cheese," Corbin said. "Pepperoni and extra cheese," Neil repeated. "Got it, buddy." Those were the last words I ever heard him say. The call came 4 hours later. A semi-truck had jackknifed on the interstate during a sudden whiteout. Neil's car was caught in the pileup. They told me he died on impact, which I think was supposed to be a comfort. It wasn't. The weeks after the funeral exist in my memory like fragments of a broken mirror. I remember faces at the service, but not names. I remember casseroles appearing in my refrigerator, but not who brought them. I remember Corbin asking me when Daddy was coming home, and I remember not having the words to explain that Daddy was never coming home again. I took leave from my job at the veterinary clinic. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning reaching for Neil's side of the bed, and the emptiness there would steal my breath every single time. Neil had always handled our finances. The mortgage, the bills, the insurance, all of it. He said he didn't want me to worry about money. He wanted to take care of us. I'd trusted him completely and I'd never questioned that arrangement. But now he was gone, and I was drowning in paperwork I didn't understand, written in language that made no sense to me. 6 weeks after the funeral, my mother-in-law Doreen showed up at my apartment with a casserole and a proposition. "Sweetheart, you can't keep going on like this," she said, settling onto my couch like she owned it. "You're barely functioning. Neil would be devastated to see you this way." I didn't argue with her. I couldn't. She was right. "Move in with us," she continued. "We have plenty of room. Vance and I would love to have Corbin close by. It would be good for him to be near family during this difficult time." I hesitated. My relationship with Doreen had never been warm. She'd made comments over the years about my cooking, my housekeeping, my career choice, my parenting. Small jabs wrapped in sweet smiles, but I'd always told myself she meant well. She was just old-fashioned. She just had high standards, and I was exhausted. The apartment held too many memories. Neil's coffee mug still sat by the sink. His coat still hung by the door. Every corner of that place reminded me of what I'd lost, so I said yes. I sold most of our furniture and moved into the upstairs bedroom of the Burney family home with Corbin. It was supposed to be temporary, a few months to get back on my feet, a chance to save money and figure out my next steps. I insisted on paying rent from the very first month. Doreen protested at first, but not very hard. "Well, if it makes you feel better," she said. $1,200 a month seems fair, don't you think?" I agreed. I wanted to contribute. I wanted to feel like I was carrying my own weight, not accepting charity. Doreen asked me to pay in cash. She said it was simpler that way, less paperwork for everyone. I didn't question it. I handed her an envelope with $1,200 on the first of every month, and she tucked it away without counting it. I should have asked for receipts. I should have insisted on a paper trail, but I was grieving and grateful and naive, and I trusted that family wouldn't take advantage of family. The first few weeks weren't terrible. Doreen cooked dinner most nights. Vance helped Corbin with a puzzle. It almost felt like healing, but slowly things began to shift. Doreen started criticizing how I loaded the dishwasher. She rearranged my groceries in the refrigerator because I'd put them in the wrong spots. She told Corbin he was being too loud when he played in the backyard, so he stopped playing outside altogether. Neil never would have let Corbin behave that way, she'd say. Neil always kept a tidier home than this, she'd mention. Neil must be watching from heaven, wondering what happened to his family, she'd sigh. Every comment was a small cut, none of them deep enough to bleed, but all of them leaving marks. My Aunt Opal called every week to check on me. She was my mother's sister, the woman who'd raised me after my parents died when I was 16. She knew me better than anyone. "How are things with the Bernies?" she'd ask. "Fine," I'd tell her. "They're just set in their ways." "Something about that woman has never sat right with me, Tessa. Be careful." I told her she was worrying over nothing. I told her Doreen was harmless. I was wrong. The morning of the lockout started like any other Saturday. I woke up early, made Corbin pancakes, and planned our errands for the day. There was a grocery store across town running a sale on his favorite cereal, and I figured we'd make a little adventure out of it. Maybe stop for ice cream on the way home. Doreen was in the kitchen when we came downstairs. She barely looked up from her coffee. "Going somewhere?" she asked. "Just groceries," I said. "We'll be back in a couple hours." She nodded, her eyes fixed on something outside the window. "Take your time." Looking back, I should have noticed something strange in her voice, a flatness that wasn't quite right. But I was focused on getting Corbin fed and out the door. I wasn't looking for warning signs. We were gone for less than 2 hours. The drive to the store took 30 minutes each way, and we spent maybe 45 minutes shopping. Corbin helped me pick out apples and debated the merits of different juice boxes. It was a good morning, a normal morning. Then we turned onto the Bernies street, and normal ended forever. I've already told you what I saw. The belongings scattered across the lawn, the wedding dress on the garbage can, the sign with those hateful red letters. But what I haven't told you is how it felt to walk through that destruction, picking up pieces of my life from the dirt. Corbin's baby book was lying open near the mailbox. The pages were damp from the sprinklers. Photographs of his first steps, his first tooth, his first day of kindergarten, all of them warped and ruined. I picked it up and held it against my chest like I could protect it from damage that had already been done. Neighbors were watching from their porches and driveways. I recognized some of them. The Hendersons from 2 doors down. The retired couple across the street whose names I could never remember. They were all staring at the spectacle Doreen had created, and not one of them came over to help. I found out later that Doreen had told them I was being evicted for stealing from her. She'd spent the morning spreading poison before I even knew what was happening. The confrontation at the front door was brief and brutal. Doreen stood there in her gardening gloves, looking at me like I was a stain she'd finally managed to scrub out. "You've been taking advantage of us long enough," she said, "living here for free while Vance and I pay for everything." "I've paid you $1,200 every single month," I said. My voice was shaking, but I forced the words out. "Every month, Doreen. In cash, just like you asked." She tilted her head, and her expression shifted into something almost pitying. "I don't know what you're talking about, Tessa. We never received any money from you, not a single dollar." The lie was so bold, so absolute that it knocked the air out of me. She'd taken that money from my hands, she'd counted it in front of me some months, and now she was standing there denying it ever happened. I had no proof, no receipts, no bank records, just my word against hers. Vance appeared behind her in the doorway. He looked at the ground, at the wall, at anything except me. He said nothing. He did nothing. He just stood there while his wife lied to my face. "Doreen, please," I said. "My son is right there. He's watching this. Can we at least talk about this inside like adults?" She glanced at Corbin, who was clutching his wet stuffed dog and crying silently. Her expression didn't change. "Children are resilient," she said. "He'll adjust. Now collect your things and leave before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." Trespassing. She was threatening to have me arrested for trespassing at the place I'd paid to live for nearly a year. I called Aunt Opal from the car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. She answered on the second ring. "What's wrong?" she said immediately. She always knew. I told her everything in broken sentences. The lawn, the sign, the denial about the rent, Corbin crying in the back seat. "Stay where you are," Opal said. "I'm leaving right now. 4 hours. Don't you dare let that woman see you cry." We loaded what we could salvage into garbage bags and Opal's truck when she arrived. Some things were ruined beyond saving. The photo albums, several of Corbin's drawings that had been left in the rain, a quilt my mother had made before she died. That night, in a motel room that smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner, I lay on a lumpy mattress with my son curled against my side. He'd finally stopped crying, but he wouldn't let go of my hand. "Mommy," he whispered in the dark, "are Grandma and Grandpa mad at Daddy in heaven too?" I pulled him closer and kissed the top of his head. I didn't have an answer. I didn't have anything except my son and my aunt and garbage bags full of damaged belongings. But I also had something else, something that was just beginning to spark in my chest beneath all the shock and grief. I had anger, and anger, I would soon discover, was exactly what I needed. 3 days after the lockout, I was sitting at a small table in Aunt Opal's motel room while Corbin slept on the bed behind us. We'd moved from the first motel to a cheaper one closer to Opal's home, trying to stretch our money while I figured out what came next. I looked like a wreck. I hadn't slept more than a few hours since Saturday. My eyes were swollen from crying and I'd barely eaten anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that sign. "Freeloaders not welcome." The words played on repeat in my head like a song I couldn't escape. Opal sat across from me with a cup of gas station coffee and a legal pad covered in her handwriting. She'd been making lists and notes since she arrived, her former court clerk instincts kicking into gear. "Something about this doesn't add up," she said for the third time that night. "Tessa, think carefully. Did Neil ever talk about that house? About how his parents came to live there?" I rubbed my temples, trying to push through the fog of exhaustion. "He mentioned his grandmother left some money when she passed. That was about 2 years before he died. He said it helped them get settled." Opal leaned forward. "Settled how? Did he say they bought the house with it? Did he say they moved in?" "I don't remember exactly. Neil didn't like talking about money with me. He said it stressed me out." Opal tapped her pen against the legal pad. "I remember something from the funeral, your grandmother-in-law's funeral, I mean. Neil said something to me that stuck in my head. He said he was relieved because now he could finally take care of things properly." I frowned. "What does that mean?" I didn't know at the time, but the way he said it, he sounded proud, like he'd accomplished something important. She paused. "Tessa, what if Neil bought that house? What if it wasn't his parents' house at all?" The idea seemed impossible. Neil would have told me if he'd purchased a house. We were married. We shared everything. Or at least I thought we did. But then I remembered how he'd handled the finances, how he'd kept me insulated from bills and paperwork, how he'd always said he wanted to protect me from worry. "Even if that were true," I said slowly, "how would we find out? I don't have any of his financial documents. His parents handled everything after he died. They said they'd take care of the estate stuff since I was in no condition to deal with it." Opal's eyes narrowed. "And you let them?" "I could barely get out of bed, Opal. I couldn't even feed my son properly. I wasn't thinking about estates and paperwork." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm not blaming you, honey. I'm just trying to understand how much control they had and how much they might have hidden from you." The next morning, Opal made phone calls while I took Corbin to a nearby park. She still had contacts from her years at the courthouse, people who knew how to find records and trace property ownership. By the time we got back to the motel, she had a name written on her legal pad. "Kirby Anselm," she said. "Property attorney, specializes in estate disputes and real estate fraud. I worked with him on a few cases back in the day. He's agreed to meet with us tomorrow." Kirby's office was in a small brick building downtown, sandwiched between a tax preparer and a dry cleaner. The waiting room smelled like old paper and coffee that had been sitting on a burner too long. I sat in a cracked leather chair with my hands folded in my lap, trying not to feel like a fraud myself. Kirby was a tall man, in his late 40s, with graying hair and glasses that he kept pushing up his nose. His desk was buried under stacks of folders and documents, but he moved through them with the ease of someone who knew exactly where everything was. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start from when your husband passed." I told him about Neil's death, about Doreen's offer to move in, about the cash payments and the lack of receipts, about the lockout and the sign and the lies about never receiving rent. Kirby listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "Mrs. Burney, did your husband ever mention purchasing property? Any property at all?" "No, but my aunt thinks he might have bought the house his parents are living in." Kirby nodded slowly. "Let me pull some records. County deeds, mortgage filings, probate documents. If your husband owned that property, there will be a paper trail." He stood and shook my hand. "Give me 48 hours. I'll call you when I find something." Those 2 days were the longest of my life. I jumped every time my phone buzzed. I barely slept. Corbin asked me why I kept staring at nothing, and I didn't know how to explain that I was waiting to find out if my whole life had been a lie. On the morning of day 4, Kirby called. "Mrs. Burney," he said, and something in his voice made my heart stop. "I need you to come to my office right away. Bring your aunt. You're going to want to sit down for this." Aunt Opal and I arrived at Kirby's office within the hour. My stomach was in knots the entire drive over. I kept telling myself not to get my hopes up, that whatever he'd found might not change anything, but the urgency in his voice had planted a seed of something I hadn't felt in days: hope. Kirby met us in the lobby and led us back to his office. There were documents spread across his desk, more than I'd seen during our first visit. He gestured for us to sit, then closed the door behind us. "Before I show you what I found, I need to ask you a question," he said. "Did your in-laws ever give you any paperwork after your husband's death? Anything related to his assets, his accounts, or the estate?" I shook my head. "They said they would handle everything. Doreen told me Neil didn't have much anyway, just some savings that went toward funeral costs." Kirby exhaled slowly. "Mrs. Burney, your mother-in-law lied to you about everything." He slid a document across the desk toward me. It was a property deed, dense with legal language I didn't fully understand, but I understood the name printed clearly in the middle of the page: Neil Andrew Burney. "Your husband purchased that house 3 years ago," Kirby said. "He paid for it outright, using an inheritance from his grandmother, plus savings he'd accumulated over several years. There's no mortgage, no liens. He owned it free and clear." I stared at the deed, reading Neil's name over and over like it might disappear if I blinked. "That's not possible," I whispered. "He never told me." "Based on what I've uncovered, I believe your husband intended to surprise you," Kirby said. "I found correspondence between Neil and his grandmother's estate attorney. Neil specifically requested that his parents not be informed about the details of his inheritance. Apparently, his grandmother had concerns about Doreen and included language in her will that her money should benefit Neil and his future family, not his parents." Opal leaned forward. "So Neil bought the house and let his parents live there?" "As a kindness, yes. The deed shows Neil as the sole owner. His parents were permitted to reside there, but they had no legal claim to the property." Kirby paused. "And here's where it gets interesting. Under Ohio law, when a person dies without a will that specifies otherwise, their property passes directly to their surviving spouse. Mrs. Burney, you've been the legal owner of that house since the day your husband died." The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to anchor myself to something solid. 11 months, I said. "I've owned that house for 11 months. And they knew. They had to have known." Kirby nodded grimly. "They were notified by the probate court. I have documentation showing that Doreen Burney signed an acknowledgement of the estate proceedings. She knew exactly who owned that property when she invited you to move in. She knew when she collected rent from you, and she knew when she changed the locks and threw you out." Opal made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a growl. "That woman collected rent on a house she didn't own, a house that belonged to her own daughter-in-law." "Which constitutes fraud," Kirby said, "along with illegal lockout of the rightful property owner and potential theft of estate assets. I've already contacted the county prosecutor's office. They're very interested in speaking with the Burneys." The next morning was day 5. I stood on the sidewalk across from the house with Kirby and Opal, watching a police cruiser pull into the driveway. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. An officer knocked on the front door. A few seconds passed. Then Doreen appeared, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition to something I'd never seen on her face before: fear. "Mrs. Burney, we need you to step outside," the officer said. "We have questions regarding fraudulent collection of rent and illegal eviction of the property owner." Doreen's eyes found me across the lawn. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then her composure cracked. "This is absurd," she said, her voice rising. "That woman has no claim to this house. She's a liar and a thief. She's been manipulating my family since the day she married my son." The officer remained unmoved. "Ma'am, we have documentation showing your daughter-in-law as the legal owner of this property. You'll need to come with us." Vance appeared in the doorway behind her. He looked small and defeated, like a man who'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. "It's over, Doreen," he said quietly. "I told you this would catch up with us." She spun around to face him. Don't you dare turn on me now." But Vance just shook his head. Neil wanted us to leave after his grandmother passed. He said the house was for Tessa and Corbin. We were supposed to find our own place. You convinced him to let us stay, and then, when he died, you saw your chance. I stepped forward, my legs steadier than I expected. Doreen watched me approach with venom in her eyes. "You called me a freeloader," I said. "You threw my son's belongings in the street. You told the neighbors I was a thief, and this whole time you were living in my house, collecting my money, lying to my face." Doreen said nothing. For the first time since I'd known her, she had no sharp comment, no subtle dig, no cruel observation. She had nothing. The weeks that followed the arrest were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and slowly putting my life back together. Doreen and Vance were charged with fraud, illegal lockout, and theft by deception. Their attorney tried to negotiate, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the evidence was overwhelming. They'd signed documents acknowledging Neil's ownership. They'd accepted rent payments on property they had no right to collect money for. They'd knowingly thrown the legal owner out of her own home. The judge wasn't sympathetic. They pleaded no contest to avoid a trial. Doreen was ordered to pay restitution totaling over $16,000, covering every rent payment I'd made, plus damages for destroyed belongings and emotional distress. Vance stood beside her in the courtroom, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 days. He never once looked in my direction. They moved out of my house within 3 weeks. I heard through a former neighbor that they relocated to a rental apartment 2 counties over, near Vance's brother. Doreen never apologized, not once. Not even when she walked past me in the courthouse hallway on her way to enter her plea. She kept her eyes forward and her chin high, as if she were the victim in all of this. Some people never change. Some people can't admit they were wrong even when the evidence is stacked against them. I've made peace with the fact that Doreen will go to her grave believing she was justified in what she did. I don't need her apology anymore. I needed the truth, and I got it. Moving back into the house was strange at first. Corbin and I walked through the rooms slowly, like we were visiting a museum instead of coming home. Doreen had taken some furniture that wasn't hers, and there were empty spaces where things used to be. But the bones of the house were good. The walls were solid, the roof didn't leak, and for the first time in almost a year, I was standing in a place that belonged to me. "Mommy, is this really ours now?" Corbin asked, his hand wrapped around mine. I knelt down so I could look him in the eyes. "This was always ours, sweetheart. Daddy bought it for us. He wanted us to have a home where we'd always be safe." Corbin thought about this for a moment. "So Daddy is still taking care of us, even from heaven?" I pulled him into a hug and held him tight. "Yes, baby. Daddy is still taking care of us." A few weeks after we moved back in, I found something that broke me open in the best possible way. I was cleaning out a closet that Doreen had claimed as her own, sorting through things she'd left behind, when I discovered a box tucked into the back corner. It was labeled with Neil's handwriting. Inside were papers, financial documents, insurance policies, and at the very bottom, a letter in an envelope with my name on it. I sat down on the closet floor and opened it with trembling hands. The letter was dated 2 weeks before Neil died. He'd never had a chance to give it to me. "Tessa," it read, "I've been working on something for you and Corbin. I know I'm not always good at talking about money, and I know you think I keep you in the dark too much, but I need you to understand that everything I've done has been for our family's future. This house is yours. I bought it for you and for our son. If anything ever happens to me, I need you to know that you'll always have a home. You'll always have security. My parents don't know I'm writing this, and honestly, I don't fully trust them to do right by you if I'm not around. So I'm putting it on paper. This house belongs to you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I love you, Tessa. I always will. Neil. I sat in that closet and cried until I had nothing left. But for the first time in almost a year, the tears felt different. They weren't just grief. They were gratitude. They were relief. They were the release of a weight I'd been carrying since the moment I watched them lower my husband into the ground. Neil had tried to protect me. He'd seen something in his parents that I'd refused to see, and he'd taken steps to make sure I'd be okay. He just ran out of time to tell me about it. Aunt Opal moved in with us for 2 months to help me get back on my feet. We repainted Corbin's bedroom together in his favorite shade of blue. We planted flowers in the front yard where that horrible sign had stood. We filled the house with noise and laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals. I went back to work at the veterinary clinic. My co-workers welcomed me with hugs and casseroles, and no mention of the rumors Doreen had spread. The gossip had died down once the truth came out. People in small towns love a scandal, but they love justice even more. Corbin started sleeping through the night again. He stopped flinching when he heard footsteps on the stairs. He made a new friend at school and started asking if he could have playdates at our house. Our house. The words still feel like a gift every time I say them. If my story has taught me anything, it's this. Grief makes you vulnerable, and there are people in this world who will exploit that vulnerability without hesitation. They'll smile at you while they're stealing from you. They'll call you family while they're planning your destruction. And they'll make you feel worthless while they're standing on ground that belongs to you. Protect yourself even when you're broken, especially when you're broken. Ask questions. Demand documentation. Keep records of every payment and every promise. Don't let anyone convince you that wanting proof makes you difficult or paranoid. It makes you smart. And if someone ever throws your belongings on the lawn and calls you a freeloader, don't crumble. Don't disappear. Stand up, find the truth, and take back what's yours. That sign said freeloaders not welcome, but in the end, the only freeloaders were the ones holding the marker. This is my home now, mine and Corbin's, and nobody will ever take it from us again. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If Tessa's story moved you, inspired you, or made you think about someone in your own life who needed to hear this, I'd love for you to share this video with them. Hit that like button if you believe that the truth always comes out eventually. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done in Tessa's situation. I read every single comment, and I love hearing your thoughts. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Click that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss another story. We post new videos every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, no matter what anyone tells you, you deserve to stand on ground that belongs to you. I'll see you in the next one.